Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Channel. Tonight, we'll be traveling back through the sands of time to one of history's most magnificent civilizations, ancient Egypt. A land of pharaohs and pyramids, of gods and mysteries, of monuments that have stood for thousands of years. Along the Nile River, a culture flourished that would shape human history in ways we are still discovering today. They built structures so precise they challenge our understanding. They wrote in symbols that took centuries to decode. They preserved their dead so well that we can still see their faces today, thousands of years later. If you enjoy these quiet explorations, I invite you to like and subscribe or share a simple thought down in the comments. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is rest, settle in, and allow the ancient world to carry you gently into sleep. Let's begin our journey to the land of the pharaohs, the gift of the Nile. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus called Egypt the gift of the Nile, and he was right. Without this river, there would have been no Egypt as we know it. The Nile stretches over 4,000 miles, from its sources in Central Africa to the Mediterranean Sea, making it one of the longest rivers in the world. But it was not just the length that mattered, it was the rhythm. Every year, like clockwork, the Nile would flood. This was not a destructive force to be feared, but a blessing to be celebrated. The floodwaters came from summer rains far to the south, in the highlands of Ethiopia. By late summer, the river would rise, spilling over its banks and spreading across the valley. When the waters receded, they left behind a layer of rich, dark silt, fertile soil that made the land perfect for farming. The Egyptians built their entire civilization around this cycle. They divided their year into 3 seasons, each tied to the river. Akhet, the inundation, when the floods came. Peret, the growing season, when crops sprouted in the fertile mud. And Shemu, the harvest, when they gathered what they had grown. This reliable pattern allowed them to plan, to build, to create a surplus of food that could support not just farmers but artists, priests, builders, and scribes. The Nile was more than a water source. It was a highway. Boats could sail north with the current or south with the prevailing winds, making travel and trade remarkably efficient. Goods moved up and down the river. Stone from quarries in the south traveled north to building sites. Grain from the delta moved south to feed the kingdom. Messages from pharaohs reached distant provinces. The river connected a land that stretched hundreds of miles from north to south. On either side of the Nile's green valley lay the desert. The ancient Egyptians called it the Red Land, and it was a place of death and danger, but it also protected them. Natural barriers of sand and rock made invasion difficult. While civilizations in Mesopotamia faced constant attacks from neighboring peoples, Egypt enjoyed long periods of stability. The desert gave them space to develop their culture without interruption. The contrast was stark. A few miles from the river, green fields gave way to barren sand. Life and death existed side by side. The Egyptians saw this division clearly. The Black Land, where the Nile's silt made everything grow, and the Red Land, where almost nothing could survive. They built their cities and farms in the Black Land. They buried their dead in the Red Land. in the dry sand that would preserve bodies for eternity. The Nile shaped everything about Egyptian life. It determined where people lived, what they ate, how they traveled, and even how they thought about the world. The river's annual flood was so reliable that it became a symbol of order and renewal. When the flood came on time, all was right with the world. The pharaoh was maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order. When the flood failed, it was a sign of chaos, of disorder that needed to be corrected. Fishermen worked the Nile's waters, pulling out abundant catches. Birds nested in the papyrus reeds that grew along the banks. Hippopotamuses wallowed in the shallows, dangerous but also sacred to the goddess Tavaret. Crocodiles sunned themselves on muddy banks, feared as embodiments of the god Sobek. The river teemed with life, and that life sustained millions of people for thousands of years. Even the river's direction shaped Egyptian thinking. They called the south upstream and the north downstream, organizing their entire geography around the flow of water. Upper Egypt was the south, closer to the river's source. Lower Egypt was the north, where the Nile spread into the fertile delta before emptying into the Mediterranean. When Egypt unified into a single kingdom, the pharaohs wore a double crown, representing both regions joined together. The Nile's gift was consistency. Other rivers might flood unpredictably, destroying crops and homes. Other lands might suffer drought or deluge without warning. But the Nile was dependable. This reliability allowed the Egyptians to develop a stable society, to build monuments that would last, to create art and literature and science that would influence the world. All because a river flooded at the same time every year, bringing life to a narrow strip of green in the middle of a vast desert. The age of the pyramids. When we think of ancient Egypt, we often think first of the pyramids. These massive stone structures have stood for more than 4,000 years, silent witnesses to the passage of time. They were built as tombs for pharaohs, eternal homes for Egypt's god-kings, but they were more than burial places. They were statements of power, monuments to human ambition, achievements in engineering that still impress us today. The first pyramid was not the smooth-sided monument we picture. It was the step pyramid of Djoser, built around 2600 to 30 BCE at Saqqara. The architect was Imhotep, a man so brilliant that later generations worshipped him as a god. Before Imhotep, royal tombs had been flat-topped structures called mastabas. Imhotep stacked 6 mastabas on top of each other, each smaller than the one below, creating the first pyramid. It rose in steps toward the sky, a stairway for the pharaoh's soul to reach the heavens. This was revolutionary. Never before had anyone built in stone on such a scale. The step pyramid stood over 200 feet tall, dominating the landscape. It announced to everyone who saw it that Egypt's rulers possessed extraordinary power. They could command thousands of workers. They could move massive blocks of stone. They could build monuments that touched the sky. Later pharaohs refined the design. They filled in the steps to create smooth-sided pyramids that gleamed white in the desert sun. The 3 great pyramids at Giza are the most famous, built during Egypt's 4th dynasty. The largest, The Great Pyramid of Khufu was the tallest structure in the world for over 3,800 years. Nothing humans built exceeded its height until the 14th century CE. The precision of these pyramids is astonishing. The Great Pyramid's base is almost perfectly level, with an error of less than an inch across its 756-foot length. Its sides align almost exactly with true north, south, east, and west. How did ancient builders, working with copper tools and no magnetic compasses, achieve such accuracy? They used the stars, observing their movements to find true north. They used water-filled trenches to establish level surfaces. They employed geometric knowledge that would not be written down for centuries. Building a pyramid required incredible organization. Workers had to quarry millions of stone blocks, some weighing several tons. They had to transport these blocks from quarries to the construction site. They had to lift them into place, layer upon layer, until the pyramid rose hundreds of feet into the air. And they had to do all this without iron tools, without wheels for moving heavy loads, without pulleys or cranes as we know them. For a long time, people believed that slaves built the pyramids, forced to labor under brutal conditions. But evidence tells a different story. The workers were ordinary Egyptians, farmers who labored on the pyramids during the flood season when their fields were underwater. They were paid in food and shelter. They worked in rotating teams, perhaps 20 to 30,000 at a time. They lived in workers' villages near the construction sites. Archaeologists have found their houses, their tools, their bread ovens, even their graffiti. These workers took pride in their labor. They organized into crews with names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaura. They competed to see which team could move the most stone. They knew they were building something eternal, something that would carry the pharaoh into the afterlife and bring honor to Egypt. This was sacred work, not slave labor. The pyramids were part of larger complexes. Each had a mortuary temple where priests performed rituals for the deceased pharaoh. A causeway connected this temple to a valley temple near the Nile, where the pharaoh's body arrived by boat. Smaller pyramids housed the tombs of queens. Rows of mastabas contained the burials of nobles and officials who wanted to spend eternity near their king. The pyramid was the center of a city of the dead. Inside, the pyramid protected the pharaoh's burial chamber. Long corridors, some sloping downward into the bedrock, others climbing upward through the pyramid's mass, led to rooms where the king's mummy rested in a stone sarcophagus. The Egyptians believed the pharaoh needed his body in the afterlife, so they preserved it with elaborate mummification. They filled the burial chamber with everything he might need: furniture, clothing, food, weapons, jewelry, all the comforts of earthly life, provided for eternity. Later generations marveled at the pyramids just as we do. Greek travelers visited them and wondered at their size. Arab scholars studied them and speculated about their purpose. European explorers in the 18th and 19th centuries measured them, climbed them, and sometimes vandalized them in search of treasures. The pyramids became symbols not just of Egypt, but of human achievement itself. Yet the age of pyramid building did not last forever. After the 4th dynasty, pyramids became smaller, less ambitious. Resources that once went to building giant tombs were directed elsewhere. Perhaps the enormous cost strained the economy. Perhaps religious ideas changed. Perhaps later pharaohs wanted to distinguish themselves from their predecessors rather than copy them. The age of the Great Pyramids lasted only about a century, a brief but brilliant moment in Egypt's long history. Still, those pyramids endure. They have survived earthquakes and sandstorms. They have outlasted the civilization that built them. They have seen empires rise and fall. Today, they stand as they have for over 4,000 years, reminders of a people who believed they could build for eternity, and who, in a sense, succeeded. The Sphinx and sacred animals. Near the pyramids at Giza crouches another icon of ancient Egypt, the Great Sphinx. This massive sculpture has the body of a lion and the head of a human, traditionally believed to represent the pharaoh Khafre. It is carved from a single ridge of limestone, standing 66 feet high and 240 feet long. For thousands of years, it has gazed eastward toward the rising sun, silent and enigmatic. The Sphinx embodies the Egyptian love of combining forms. They saw no contradiction in merging human intelligence with animal strength. In fact, their gods often appeared as mixtures of human and animal. This blending reflected a deeper belief that the natural and supernatural worlds were connected, that divine power could manifest in many forms. No one knows exactly when the Sphinx was built, though most scholars place it during the reign of Khafre, around 2500 BCE. Over the centuries, desert sand buried it up to its neck. Only the head remained visible, staring out over the dunes. Ancient pharaohs dug it out, inscribing stones that recorded their efforts. One such stone, placed between the Sphinx's paws by Thutmose IV, tells how the prince fell asleep in its shadow and dreamed that the Sphinx promised him the throne if he would clear away the sand. The Sphinx has suffered damage over the millennia. Its nose is missing, broken off at some point in history. Some blame Napoleon's soldiers, but evidence suggests the damage occurred earlier, perhaps during the 14th century. The face has been worn by wind and sand. The body shows cracks and erosion. Yet it remains, a testament to the skill of ancient sculptors and the durability of stone. Animals held special significance in Egyptian religion and daily life. The Egyptians observed animals closely and saw in them qualities worth honoring. Lions represented strength and royalty. Falcons embodied keen sight and the ability to soar above earthly concerns. Ibises, with their curved beaks, suggested the crescent moon and the passage of time. Crocodiles commanded fear and respect as predators of the Nile. Many gods took animal forms or were depicted with animal heads. Horus, god of kingship and the sky, appeared as a falcon or as a man with a falcon's head. Anubis, god of mummification and the dead, had the head of a jackal. Bastet, goddess of home and protection, was shown as a cat or a woman with a cat's head. Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, bore the head of an ibis. Hathor, goddess of love and joy, was sometimes shown as a cow, sometimes as a woman with cow's horns. These were not primitive superstitions, but complex theological ideas. The Egyptians did not believe a god was literally an animal. Rather, they saw the animal as a symbol, a way to represent divine attributes that humans could understand. The falcon flies high and sees far, perfect symbols for a sky god. The jackal roams the desert edges where the dead are buried, making it appropriate for a god of the afterlife. Some animals were so sacred that harming them was a crime. Cats were especially revered, associated with the goddess Bastet. Families kept cats as pets and mourned deeply when they died, sometimes mummifying them and burying them in special cat cemeteries. Thousands of cat mummies have been found, tiny bundles wrapped with the same care given to human dead. Ibises were sacred to Thoth. At certain temple sites, priests maintained flocks of ibises, feeding them and caring for them as living representatives of the god. When an ibis died, it might be mummified and placed in special burial galleries. Archaeologists have discovered vast underground chambers filled with millions of ibis mummies, offerings accumulated over centuries. Crocodiles were both feared and worshipped. In some regions, people kept sacred crocodiles in temple pools, adorning them with gold jewelry and feeding them choice meats. When a sacred crocodile died, it received burial with full honors. Yet in other parts of Egypt, crocodiles were hunted and killed. The relationship was complicated, reflecting the animal's dual nature as both dangerous predator and powerful deity. Bulls represented strength and fertility. The Apis bull, kept at Memphis, was believed to be a manifestation of the god Ptah. This bull lived in luxury at the temple, and when it died, all Egypt mourned. It was mummified and buried in a special tomb, and priests searched the land for a new bull with specific markings to serve as the next Apis. The burial vaults of the Apis bulls, known as the Serapeum, contained massive stone sarcophagi, each weighing many tons. Even humble creatures had their place. Scarab beetles, which roll balls of dung across the ground, became symbols of the sun god rolling the sun across the sky. Scarab amulets were everywhere, carved from stone and worn as jewelry. They appeared on seals, in art, and were even placed over the hearts of mummies to protect them in the afterlife. Frogs represented fertility and rebirth because they appeared in great numbers after the Nile's flood. The goddess Heket, who assisted at births, had the head of a frog. Snakes could be protective or dangerous. The cobra goddess Wadjet guarded the pharaoh, rising on the royal crown as the uraeus, ready to spit fire at enemies. Yet snakes also represented chaos and evil, like the serpent Apophis, who tried to devour the sun each night. This rich symbolism shows how closely the Egyptians observed the natural world. They noticed that certain birds migrated with the seasons. They saw how the Nile's rhythms affected animal behavior. They watched predator and prey, life and death, played out in the marshes and deserts around them. From these observations, they built a complex system of religious meaning that connected earth and heaven, mortal and divine, human and animal, the pharaoh, the living god. At the center of Egyptian civilization stood the pharaoh, both king and god. This was not merely a political title, but but a religious reality. Egyptians believed their pharaoh was the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god, and would become Osiris, god of the afterlife, upon death. The pharaoh was the intermediary between the mortal world and the realm of the gods, the one person who could maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order that kept chaos at bay. The word pharaoh itself originally meant great house, referring to the royal palace. Over time, it came to mean the king himself, but the pharaoh was never just a person. Upon taking the throne, the king underwent a transformation. He was no longer merely human, but became divine. This divinity was not absolute in the way monotheistic religions might understand it. The pharaoh could make mistakes, could be criticized by advisors, could even be overthrown, but his role as the link between earth and heaven remained central to Egyptian thought. Pharaohs bore 5 names, each with specific meanings. The Horus name connected them to the falcon god. The 2 ladies' name invoked the protective goddesses of Upper and Lower Egypt. The golden Horus name emphasized their divine nature. The praenomen, or throne name, was the official name taken upon coronation and was written inside a cartouche, an oval ring symbolizing the pharaoh's rule over everything the sun encircled. The nomen was the birth name, also written in a cartouche. This elaborate naming reflected the pharaoh's multifaceted role. Coronation ceremonies transformed a prince into a pharaoh. Rituals performed by priests invoked the god's blessings. The new king received the royal regalia, the double crown combining the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. The crook and flail, symbolizing the shepherd and agricultural roles of kingship, the false beard tied to the chin as a mark of divine authority. These were not mere decorations, but powerful symbols that made the pharaoh's divine status visible to all. The pharaoh's duties were extensive. He had to perform religious rituals, theoretically serving as the high priest of every temple in Egypt. In practice, he delegated this work to a vast priesthood, but the fiction remained that every ritual was done in his name. He had to lead the army in war, defending Egypt from foreign threats and expanding its borders. He had to oversee building projects, from temples and palaces to irrigation canals and fortresses. He had to dispense justice, serving as the ultimate judge in legal disputes. Most importantly, the pharaoh had to maintain Ma'at. This concept is difficult to translate simply. It meant truth, justice, order, balance, harmony. It was the way things should be, the proper functioning of the cosmos. The pharaoh maintained Ma'at by ruling justly, by performing the correct rituals, by defeating Egypt's enemies, by ensuring that the Nile flooded on time. When Ma'at prevailed, all was well. When it failed, chaos threatened to overwhelm the world. Some pharaohs became legendary. Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid, was remembered for his ambition but also, in later stories, for his tyranny. Hatshepsut, one of the few female pharaohs, ruled successfully for over 20 years, building magnificent temples and sponsoring trade expeditions. Akhenaten tried to revolutionize Egyptian religion, abandoning the traditional gods to worship only the sun disk Aten, a change that did not survive his death. Ramesses II, who ruled for 66 years, covered Egypt with monuments bearing his name and fought the Hittites to a standstill at the Battle of Kadesh. Tutankhamun, though a minor king who died young, became the most famous pharaoh of all because his tomb was found nearly intact in 1922. The treasures buried with him, especially his golden death mask, have become icons of ancient Egypt. Ironically, King Tut achieved in death a fame that eluded him in life. The pharaoh was both distant and present. Common people rarely saw him in person. He lived in palaces, surrounded by officials and servants. When he appeared in public, it was with great ceremony, riding in a golden chariot or carried on a palanquin, preceded by guards and heralds. Yet he was also everywhere. His name appeared on monuments throughout the land. His decrees were read in towns and villages. His image was carved on temple walls, often shown offering to the gods or smiting Egypt's enemies. Through these representations, the pharaoh's power and presence permeated Egyptian life. Succession could be straightforward or complicated. Ideally, the throne passed from father to son, maintaining the royal bloodline. But Egypt had no strict law of primogeniture. A pharaoh might have many sons by different wives. Powerful officials or ambitious relatives sometimes seized the throne. Women occasionally ruled, usually as regents for young sons, but a few, like Hatshepsut, claimed full pharaonic powers. The pharaoh's family lived in luxury but also under pressure. Queens could wield significant influence, especially if they were great royal wives, the chief among the pharaoh's many spouses. Royal children received the best education, learning to read and write, studying mathematics and administration, training in sports and military arts. Princes knew that one of them would eventually become pharaoh, while others would serve as priests, generals, or governors. Princesses might marry foreign kings to cement alliances, or marry their brothers to keep the royal bloodline pure. Despite the pharaoh's divine status, the position was not easy. The burden of maintaining cosmic order weighed heavily. A pharaoh faced constant pressure to prove his worth through military victories and building projects. He had to navigate court politics, manage a huge bureaucracy, and keep regional governors loyal. He had to produce an heir to continue the dynasty. And he had to prepare for his own death, commissioning his tomb and ensuring that his mortuary cult would continue after he joined the gods. Yet pharaohs also enjoyed unprecedented privilege. They commanded the wealth of one of the ancient world's richest kingdoms. They lived in magnificent palaces with gardens and pools. They ate the finest foods and drank the best wines. They wore the most beautiful clothing and jewelry. They were entertained by musicians, dancers, and storytellers. They went hunting in the desert or fowling in the marshes, enjoying sports denied to common people. Their word was law, their wishes commands. This combination of absolute power and divine responsibility created a unique institution. The pharaoh was not merely a king, but the axis around which Egyptian civilization turned. As long as the pharaoh maintained Maat, Egypt prospered. The Nile flooded on schedule, crops grew abundantly, enemies were defeated, and order prevailed. The pharaoh's success was Egypt's success. His failure, Egypt's failure. This belief sustained the institution for 3,000 years, through dozens of dynasties and hundreds of individual rulers, making it one of the longest-lasting political systems in human history. Hieroglyphics, the sacred writing. One of ancient Egypt's most recognizable features is its writing system. Hieroglyphics. The word comes from Greek, meaning sacred carvings, and that is exactly what they were. These beautiful symbols adorned temple walls, tomb chambers, monuments, and papyrus scrolls. They were more than mere letters. Each hieroglyph was a tiny work of art, a picture of something from the Egyptian world. Hieroglyphics developed around 3200 BCE, making it one of the world's oldest writing systems. At first, the symbols were pictographic, simple pictures representing the things they showed. A picture of a bird meant bird. A picture of a house meant house. But the Egyptians quickly developed a more sophisticated system. They began using symbols to represent sounds, not just objects. The same bird picture might represent not just a bird, but the sound A in a word. This created a complex writing system that combined different types of symbols. Some hieroglyphs were logograms, representing whole words. Some were phonograms, representing sounds. Some were determinatives, signs that had no sound value but clarified the meaning of other symbols. A sentence might mix all three types, creating a script that was both beautiful and functional. The Egyptians wrote hieroglyphics in rows or columns, from right to left or left to right. How did you know which direction to read? The answer lay in the symbols themselves. Human and animal figures faced toward the beginning of the line. If a bird faced right, you read from right to left. If it faced left, you read from left to right. This flexibility allowed scribes to create balanced, aesthetically pleasing compositions. Learning to read and write hieroglyphics required years of training. Young boys, usually from elite families, attended scribe schools where they spent hours copying texts, memorizing thousands of symbols, and learning the complex rules of grammar and spelling. The training was rigorous, and teachers did not hesitate to use physical punishment to motivate lazy students, but the rewards were worth it. A trained scribe could enter the royal administration, serving as a bureaucrat, accountant, or record keeper. It was one of the few paths to social advancement in ancient Egypt. Scribes enjoyed special status. While farmers toiled in the fields under the hot sun, scribes worked in the shade, keeping their hands clean and their minds sharp. They wore white linen kilts and carried their writing tools with pride. Palettes with cakes of black and red ink, reed brushes for writing, and rolls of papyrus for records. Countless Egyptian texts praise the scribe's profession, contrasting it favorably with the hard physical labor of other occupations. The Egyptians used hieroglyphics primarily for sacred and monumental purposes. Temple walls bore religious texts and royal decrees carved in stone. Tomb chambers contained spells and prayers to help the deceased navigate the afterlife. Stelae, upright stone slabs, commemorated important events or individuals. These formal contexts demanded the full beauty of hieroglyphic art, with each symbol carefully carved or painted. For everyday writing, scribes used simplified versions of hieroglyphics. Hieratic script retained the same language and grammar, but rendered the symbols in quick, cursive strokes, suited to writing on papyrus with a reed brush. Administrative documents, letters, legal contracts, medical texts, and literary works were typically written in hieratic. It was faster to write than formal hieroglyphics, but required the same training to read. Later, an even more simplified script called demotic emerged for common use. Demotic was so different from classical hieroglyphics that it looked like a completely different writing system, though it still represented the Egyptian language. By the time of the Ptolemaic period, when Greeks ruled Egypt, demotic was the everyday script, while hieroglyphics survived mainly in temples and tombs, used by priests maintaining ancient traditions. The Egyptians wrote on various materials. For important documents meant to last, they carved into stone. For everyday records, they used papyrus, a writing material made from the papyrus plant that grew in the Nile marshes. Workers cut the plant's stem into strips, laid them in perpendicular layers, pounded them together, and dried them in the sun. The natural starches in the plant fibers bonded the layers into a smooth writing surface. Sheets could be pasted end to end to create long scrolls. Papyrus was expensive but more practical than stone tablets for record keeping. The Egyptians used it for everything from legal documents to magical spells, from mathematical problems to love poetry. Thousands of papyri have survived, preserved by Egypt's dry climate. These documents offer intimate glimpses into ancient Egyptian life, revealing the concerns, beliefs, and daily activities of people who lived thousands of years ago. Some Egyptian texts are religious, like the pyramid texts carved inside royal tombs, or the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells to help the deceased reach the afterlife. Others are practical, like medical papyri describing treatments for various ailments, or mathematical papyri solving problems in geometry and arithmetic. Some are literary, like the story of Sinuhe, the tale of an official who flees Egypt and eventually returns, or the instructions of Peter Hotep, a wisdom text offering advice on proper behavior. For over 3,000 years, hieroglyphics were written and read. Then, as Christianity spread through Egypt in the early centuries CE, the old religion declined, temples closed. Priests who knew the sacred writing died without passing on their knowledge. By the 5th century CE, no one could read hieroglyphics anymore. The beautiful symbols became mere decorations, their meanings lost. For over 1,000 years, hieroglyphics remained a mystery. Scholars could see them carved on monuments and written on papyri, but they could not decipher them. Many tried. Some thought each symbol was a mystical emblem hiding secret knowledge. Others believed they represented whole concepts rather than sounds. All were wrong. The breakthrough came in 1822, when Jean-François Champollion, a French scholar, deciphered the Rosetta Stone. This stone, found by French soldiers in Egypt in 1799, bore the same text in 3 scripts: hieroglyphics, demotic, and ancient Greek. By comparing the Greek text, which scholars could read, with the hieroglyphic version, Champollion cracked the code. He realized that hieroglyphics represented sounds, not just ideas, and that the symbols could be read phonetically. Champollion's discovery opened the door to understanding ancient Egypt. Suddenly, texts that had been silent for centuries spoke again. Scholars could read the names of pharaohs, the words of prayers, the records of battles and building projects. The Egyptians themselves could tell their story in their own words. This transformed Egyptology from treasure hunting into a true academic discipline. Today, we can read hieroglyphics almost as easily as ancient scribes did. We understand the grammar, the vocabulary, the subtle nuances of the language. We can appreciate the wordplay and puns that Egyptian writers enjoyed. We can trace the evolution of the language over 3,000 years. And we can marvel at the beauty of the script, each symbol a small piece of art, preserving the words and thoughts of a civilization long vanished but never forgotten. The Book of the Dead and the Journey to the Afterlife. Ancient Egyptians devoted enormous energy to preparing for death. They did not see death as an ending, but as a transition to a different kind of existence. The afterlife was real to them, a place that required careful preparation to reach successfully. To help the deceased navigate this journey, the Egyptians developed elaborate funeral texts, the most famous being the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead is not actually a single book. It is a collection of spells, prayers, and instructions designed to guide and protect the deceased through the dangers of the afterlife. Different versions existed, and wealthy individuals could commission personalized copies tailored to their needs. These texts were written on papyrus scrolls and placed in the tomb with the mummy, ready to be consulted when needed. The spells covered every imaginable hazard. Some protected the deceased from demons and hostile spirits. Others helped preserve the body's integrity in the afterlife. Some provided passwords to get past guardians blocking important doorways. Others identified the deceased with various gods, claiming divine powers. There were spells for ensuring the deceased could breathe, eat, drink, and move about freely in the afterlife. One of the most important sections described the judgment of the dead. According to Egyptian belief, everyone who died faced judgment in the Hall of Two Truths. The god Osiris, Lord of the underworld, presided over this court. The deceased stood before him, and 42 divine judges, each representing a different sin. The heart, believed to be the seat of thought and memory, was weighed on a great scale against the feather of Ma'at, symbol of truth and justice. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, operated the scale. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, recorded the result. If the heart and feather balanced, the deceased had lived a just life and could proceed to paradise. If the heart was heavier, weighed down by sin and wrongdoing, it would be devoured by Ammit, a terrifying creature that was part crocodile, part lion, and part hippopotamus. The soul would then cease to exist, suffering a second, final death. The deceased had to recite the negative confession, a list of sins they claimed not to have committed. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not told lies. I have not caused pain. I have not polluted water. I have not cheated in measuring grain. The list was long and detailed, covering ethical behavior and ritual purity. By proclaiming their innocence of these crimes, The deceased hoped to prove their worthiness. Of course, the system allowed for some flexibility. The Book of the Dead included spells to prevent the heart from betraying its owner by testifying against them. One spell essentially told the heart to keep quiet during judgment. This might seem like cheating, but the Egyptians saw it differently. The spells were part of the necessary magical knowledge for navigating the afterlife. Having them was no guarantee of success. You still needed to have lived well, but the spells helped ensure that technical errors or malicious spirits did not derail your justified claims of innocence. Those who passed judgment entered paradise, a place the Egyptians called the Field of Reeds. This was an idealized version of Egypt itself, where crops grew abundantly, the Nile always flooded at the right time, and there was no hunger, pain, or sorrow. The deceased could enjoy all the pleasures of earthly life without its hardships. They could farm their fields, though Shabtis, magical servant figures buried with them, would do the actual work. They could feast on bread and beer, meat and wine. They could be reunited with loved ones who had gone before. But reaching the Field of Reeds was only possible if the body was preserved. This belief drove the Egyptian practice of mummification. They reasoned that the soul needed a body to return to, a physical anchor in the world of the living. Without it, the soul would become restless, lost, unable to enjoy the afterlife. Mummification was an elaborate process taking 70 days. First, embalmers removed the internal organs, which decayed quickly. The brain was pulled out through the nose with hooks and discarded, as the Egyptians did not recognize its importance. The heart, however, stayed in the body, as it would be needed for judgment. The other organs, the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines, were dried, wrapped, and placed in 4 canopic jars, each protected by a different god. The body was then covered with natron, a natural salt that drew out moisture. For 40 days, the body lay under natron, slowly drying out. Once completely desiccated, embalmers washed the body, rubbed it with oils and resins to preserve and perfume it, and began the wrapping. Hundreds of yards of linen strips, interspersed with protective amulets, encased the body from head to toe. The process was as much ritual as practical preservation, with priests reciting spells at each stage. The wrapped mummy was placed in a coffin, often several nested coffins, each decorated with religious imagery and texts. The innermost coffin might be shaped like a human, called an anthropoid coffin, with the deceased's idealized face painted on it. These coffins were works of art, covered in hieroglyphic prayers and scenes from mythology. Finally, the mummy, in its coffins, was laid to rest in a tomb. For pharaohs and the wealthy, these tombs were elaborate structures, chambers cut into rock or built of stone, decorated with paintings and carvings showing the deceased enjoying the afterlife. For common people, burial might be simpler, but even the poor tried to preserve their dead if they could afford it. Tombs were filled with grave goods, everything the deceased might need in the afterlife: furniture, clothing, cosmetics, jewelry, weapons, tools, food, and drink. All were provided. Model servants and animals, or painted scenes of them, ensured the deceased would have help and companionship. Wealthy tombs contained treasures of gold and precious stones, which unfortunately attracted robbers throughout Egypt's history. The living had responsibilities to the dead. Family members brought offerings to the tomb, food and drink to sustain the deceased's ka, or life force. Priests performed rituals in mortuary temples, reciting prayers and presenting offerings. As long as someone remembered you, brought offerings, and spoke your name, you continued to exist in the afterlife. This is why Egyptians feared being forgotten above almost everything else. To be forgotten was to die a second death, final and absolute. This explains the Egyptian obsession with monuments and inscriptions. By carving your name in stone, you ensured that future generations would see it and speak it, keeping you alive. Pharaohs built enormous temples partly to house the gods, but also to preserve their own names. Nobles erected stelae listing their titles and achievements. Even common people, if they could afford it, had simple stones carved with their names. The Egyptian view of the soul was complex. They believed a person consisted of several parts. The ba was the personality, often shown as a human-headed bird. It could move freely between the tomb and the outside world. The ka was the life force, sustained by offerings. The ach was the transfigured spirit, the form you took if you successfully reached the afterlife. All these parts needed to be kept together and properly cared for. Magic was essential to afterlife success. Spells could transform you, protect you, provide for you, and transport you. They could make food offerings multiply indefinitely. They could allow you to assume different forms, becoming a lotus flower or a phoenix to escape danger. They could open doors and defeat enemies. The Book of the Dead and similar texts were essentially instruction manuals for using magic in the afterlife. This elaborate system might seem strange to modern eyes, but it gave ancient Egyptians comfort. Death was not oblivion, but transformation. The pain of losing loved ones was eased by the belief that you would see them again in the field of reeds. The injustices of life could be rectified in the Hall of Judgment, where what mattered was not wealth or status, but how you had lived. And the afterlife offered eternal continuation of the good parts of earthly existence, a comforting vision of paradise. Not everyone could afford elaborate mummification and rich grave goods, but even the poor participated in this system. Simple burials in the dry desert sand often preserved bodies naturally. Basic offerings and prayers could be provided. The important thing was not the expense, but the intention, the care taken to help the deceased reach the afterlife. The consistency of these beliefs across 3,000 years is remarkable. While details changed and evolved, the basic concepts remained constant. From the earliest dynasties to the latest, Egyptians believed in judgment after death, in the necessity of preserving the body, in the power of magic and offerings, in an afterlife that was both reward and continuation. This long continuity shaped Egyptian culture profoundly, influencing everything from art and architecture to ethics and daily behavior. Daily life in ancient Egypt. While monuments and mummies capture our imagination, most ancient Egyptians lived simpler lives as farmers, craftspeople, and laborers. Understanding their daily existence helps us see the civilization behind the spectacular remains. The vast majority of Egyptians were farmers. They lived in small villages along the Nile, in houses made of mud brick. These houses were simple, usually just a few rooms, with flat roofs where people slept on hot nights. The walls were plastered with mud and sometimes painted white to reflect heat. Windows were small to keep out the sun, but allow breezes. Inside, furniture was minimal: sleeping mats, low stools, perhaps a few wooden chests for storing clothes and valuables. The farmer's year followed the Nile's rhythm. During the flood season, when fields were underwater, many worked on royal building projects or temple construction. This was not slave labor, but a form of taxation, corvée duty that all able-bodied men owed the pharaoh. They were fed and housed while they worked, and the labor was temporary. When the floodwaters receded, the planting season began. Farmers plowed their fields with simple wooden plows pulled by oxen. They scattered seed by hand and used sheep or goats to trample it into the mud. Then they waited, tending the growing crops, irrigating when needed by directing water from canals into their fields. Egypt's climate meant little rain, so irrigation was essential. Harvest time was busy and crucial. The entire family turned out to cut the grain with sickles, gather it into sheaves, and transport it to threshing floors. There, oxen trampled the grain to separate kernels from chaff, and workers tossed it in the air so the wind would blow away the lighter chaff. The grain was then stored in granaries, large bins that kept it dry and protected from vermin. Not all the harvest belonged to the farmer. A significant portion went to the state as taxes. Government scribes measured the fields and assessed the tax owed. They returned at harvest time to collect their share. These taxes supported the pharaoh, the army, the priesthood, and the bureaucracy. Failure to pay could result in beatings or loss of property, so farmers did their best to meet their obligations. Farmers grew primarily emmer wheat and barley. Wheat was ground into flour for bread, the staple food of ancient Egypt. Barley was used for making beer, the other staple. Every Egyptian, from pharaoh to peasant, ate bread and drank beer daily. Bread came in many varieties, and beer was thick and nutritious, more like liquid bread than modern beer. In addition to grains, farmers grew vegetables: onions, leeks, garlic, lettuce, cucumbers, and lentils. They cultivated fruits like dates, figs, and grapes. Along the Nile, they harvested papyrus for making rope, sandals, mats, and writing material. Flax was grown and processed into linen thread for weaving cloth. Egyptian women did much of the domestic work. They ground grain into flour, a daily chore requiring hours of kneeling at a grinding stone. They baked bread in clay ovens. They brewed beer by soaking barley bread in water and letting it ferment. They spun flax fibers into thread and wove the thread into linen cloth on looms. They cooked meals, usually simple stews of vegetables and occasionally fish or fowl. Meat was a luxury for most families, reserved for special occasions. Women also helped in the fields during busy times and might sell surplus produce in local markets. They had more freedom than women in many other ancient societies. Egyptian women could own property, conduct business, and initiate divorce. They were not secluded or veiled. Many worked as weavers, bakers, or brewers. Some became priestesses, though most religious positions went to men. Children in farming families started working young. By age 5 or 6, they helped with simple tasks like watching younger siblings or feeding animals. As they grew, they took on more responsibilities. Boys learned their father's trade, whether farming, carpentry, or another craft. Girls learned from their mothers how to run a household. Education was mostly practical and hands-on. Only a small percentage of children, usually boys from elite families, attended formal schools to become scribes. There they learned reading, writing, and mathematics, skills that opened doors to administrative careers. The curriculum was rigorous, with much memorization and copying of texts. Teachers were strict, and corporal punishment was common, but graduates could escape the hard physical labor that most Egyptians endured. Craftspeople formed another important segment of society. Egypt's artists and artisans created the beautiful objects we admire in museums. Sculptors carved statues from stone, working with hard materials like granite, using copper chisels, stone hammers, and sand as an abrasive. Painters decorated tomb walls with vibrant scenes of daily life, religious rituals, and mythological events. Jewelers crafted intricate necklaces, bracelets, and rings from gold, silver, and semi-precious stones. These craftspeople often worked in workshops attached to palaces or temples. They were employed by the state or wealthy patrons, receiving payment in food, clothing, and other goods, rather than money. Egypt did not have coined money until the late period. The economy operated on barter and redistribution, with the state collecting taxes in goods and redistributing them as rations to workers. At Deir el-Medina, we have remarkable evidence of a workers' village. This settlement housed the craftsmen who built and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Because the work was so important and secret, the workers and their families lived together in an isolated village. Thousands of ostraca, broken pottery, or limestone flakes used as scrap paper have been found there, preserving the workers' letters, accounts, and even complaints about late ration deliveries. These documents reveal a community much like any other. People worried about their families, gossiped about neighbors, had disputes over property, fell in love, and mourned their dead. We learn about a man named Paneb who was accused of corruption and theft. We read love poems written by young people. We see records of workers taking days off because they were sick, or brewing beer, or having family emergencies. These glimpses of ordinary life make the ancient Egyptians feel more human and relatable. Egyptian society was hierarchical, but not rigidly fixed. The pharaoh sat at the top, a god among men. Below him were the nobles and high officials, often related to the royal family, who governed provinces and managed the bureaucracy. Next came priests, who served the gods in temples, and scribes, the literate administrators who kept the system running. Then came craftspeople, who had specialized skills and relative security. At the bottom were farmers and laborers, the vast majority who worked the land and built the monuments. Despite this hierarchy, some social mobility existed. A talented scribe could rise to high office. A skilled craftsman might attract royal patronage. Even a farmer's son, if he learned to read and write, could become a scribe and improve his family's status. The Egyptian ideal praised merit and ability, though in practice, birth and connections mattered greatly. Slavery existed in ancient Egypt, but was not the foundation of the economy, as in some other ancient societies. Most laborers were free peasants, fulfilling their obligations to the state. War captives might become slaves, and some people sold themselves or their children into slavery during hard times. But slaves could own property, marry free people, and even buy their freedom. The institution was less harsh than it would become in later civilizations. Family was central to Egyptian life. Most people married young, in their teens or early 20s. Marriage was not a religious ceremony, but a civil arrangement, essentially a couple deciding to live together and manage property jointly. Divorce was possible and could be initiated by either spouse. Children were cherished, and families could be large, though infant mortality was high. Egyptians enjoyed leisure time when they could. They played board games like Senet, a race game whose rules we are still trying to fully understand. They held feasts with music and dancing on special occasions. They went hunting and fishing, both for food and for sport. They told stories, recited poetry, and enjoyed festivals that marked the religious calendar. Religion permeated daily life. Household gods like Bez, a dwarf deity who protected families, and Taweret, a hippopotamus goddess who helped women in childbirth, were worshipped at home shrines. People wore amulets to ward off evil and seek divine favor. They consulted oracle priests for guidance on important decisions. They believed that maintaining good relations with the gods through offerings and prayers would bring prosperity and protection. Despite hardships, disease, and the back-breaking labor that farming required, many Egyptians seem to have found satisfaction in their lives. Tomb paintings often show idealized scenes of the deceased enjoying life, feasting, hunting, and relaxing with family. These were not just hopes for the afterlife, but reflections of earthly pleasures worth remembering and continuing. Life expectancy was short by modern standards, perhaps 30 to 35 years on average. Many children died young. Women faced the dangers of childbirth. Accidents and diseases claimed many before old age, but those who survived to maturity often lived into their 50s or 60s, and a few reached 70 or beyond. Tomb inscriptions sometimes celebrate longevity as a sign of divine favor. The rhythm of daily life, tied to the Nile and the seasons, continued for thousands of years with remarkable consistency. Farming techniques, tools, and crops changed little. Social structures remained stable. Religious beliefs persisted. This continuity gave Egyptian civilization a sense of timelessness, a feeling that the proper order of things had been established long ago and should continue forever. Temples and the gods. Egyptian temples were not like modern churches or mosques, places where ordinary people gathered for communal worship. They were houses of the gods, sacred spaces where divine beings dwelt in stone images, and where only priests could enter the innermost sanctums. These temples were focal points of religious, economic, and political power, playing crucial roles in Egyptian society. The largest temples were enormous complexes, built and expanded over centuries by successive pharaohs. The Temple of Karnak at Thebes is the largest religious structure ever built, covering over 200 acres. Its great hypostyle hall contains 134 massive columns, some 70 feet tall, creating a stone forest that still awes visitors today. Temple construction followed a standard pattern. A long avenue of sphinxes led to the entrance, marked by massive trapezoidal towers called pylons. Between the pylons, tall wooden doors opened into a courtyard, usually with columns around the edges. Beyond this lay the hypostyle hall, a covered space with forest of columns supporting a stone roof. Finally, at the heart of the temple was the sanctuary, a small dark chamber housing the cult statue of the god. Each morning, the high priest or his delegate performed the daily temple ritual. He entered the sanctuary, broke the seal on the shrine doors, and greeted the god's image. He purified the statue with water and incense, dressed it in fresh linen, and presented offerings of food and drink. Hymns were sung, prayers recited. The ritual affirmed the god's presence and ensured the deity's continued favor toward Egypt. Theoretically, the pharaoh performed these rituals himself, but in practice, he delegated them to priests who acted in his name. Temples were served by large staffs. Full-time priests managed the daily rituals and festivals. Lesser priests, who served part-time rotations, assisted with ceremonies and maintained the temple. Scribes kept records and managed the temple's extensive properties. Musicians and singers performed during rituals. Craftsmen produced the objects needed for worship. Farmers worked temple lands, providing the food offered to the gods. The economic power of temples was immense. They owned vast estates, thousands of acres of farmland that generated wealth. They employed thousands of people. They received donations from pharaohs and wealthy individuals hoping to gain divine favor. Temples functioned as major landowners and employers, integral to Egypt's economy. Major gods had temples throughout Egypt, but certain cities were special cult centers. Thebes was sacred to Amun, king of the gods. Memphis honored Ptah, god of craftsmen. Heliopolis worshipped Ra, the sun god. Hermopolis belonged to Thoth, god of wisdom. These cities became wealthy and influential because of their patron deities. The Egyptian pantheon was complex and fluid. Hundreds of gods existed, from major state deities to local spirits. Gods could merge, with one god's attributes combining with another's. Ra and Amun merged to become Amun-Ra. Gods could have multiple forms and aspects. Hathor could be a cow, a woman, or a lioness, depending on context. Some gods were cosmic. Ra was the sun itself, traveling across the sky in his boat each day and through the underworld each night, battling the chaos serpent Apophis. Nut was the sky. her star-spangled body arching over the earth. Geb was the earth itself, lying beneath Nut. Other gods had specific domains. Osiris ruled the dead and the afterlife. Isis was a powerful magician and devoted mother and wife. Seth represented chaos and the desert. Horus, as the sky god and divine falcon, was patron of pharaohs. Thoth invented writing and maintained cosmic order through knowledge. Many gods had animal associations, but were not simply animal gods. They could appear as animals, humans, or hybrids. This flexibility reflected the Egyptian understanding that divine power could manifest in many forms, each aspect revealing a different truth about the god. Myths explained the world and the gods' relationships. The creation myth of Heliopolis described how Atum emerged from the primordial waters and created other gods through thought and speech. The Osiris myth told how the good king Osiris was murdered by his jealous brother Seth, mourned and resurrected by his wife Isis, and became Lord of the Dead. These stories were not just entertainment, but explanations of cosmic order, the cycle of seasons, the pharaoh's divine kingship, and the possibility of resurrection after death. Festivals brought temples to life and allowed ordinary people to participate in religion. During festivals, the god's image, hidden in a portable shrine, was carried out of the temple in grand processions. The people could not see the statue itself, but they could see its shrine, follow the procession, make offerings, and seek the god's blessing through oracles. The Opet festival at Thebes was one of the grandest. The image of Amun traveled from Karnak Temple to Luxor Temple in an elaborate boat procession. The festival celebrated the pharaoh's divine kingship and lasted for weeks, with music, dancing, and feasting. Such events reinforced religious beliefs, while providing entertainment and a break from daily routines. Oracles played an important role. People would ask questions of the god, and priests would interpret signs to provide answers. A common method involved having shrine bearers move forward or back, swaying in ways that priests interpreted as the god's response. These oracles guided decisions on everything, from legal disputes to business ventures to whom one should marry. Egyptian religion had no single sacred text like the Bible or Quran, no unified theology or dogma. Beliefs varied by region and changed over time. Contradictory myths coexisted without bothering anyone. The sun god could be Ra, Atum, Khepri, or Amun, depending on context. Creation could happen multiple ways in different stories. This flexibility allowed the religion to accommodate new ideas while maintaining ancient traditions. Some gods rose and fell in importance. During the New Kingdom, Amun of Thebes became supreme, as Thebes was the capital and home of powerful pharaohs. The Aten, the sun disk, briefly became the sole god during Akhenaten's reign, though this radical experiment did not survive the pharaoh's death. Local gods remained important to their communities, even as national gods received grand temples. Magic and religion were inseparable. Priests were also magicians, using spells and rituals to harness divine power. Amulets, inscribed with gods' names or sacred symbols, protected wearers. Healing spells invoked gods to cure illnesses. The distinction between religion and magic that later cultures would make did not exist for Egyptians. Both were ways of interacting with the divine forces that permeated the world. Temples also served as centers of learning. Temple schools taught reading, writing, and religious knowledge. Temple libraries preserved scrolls of sacred texts, rituals, hymns, and myths. Priests studied astronomy to maintain the religious calendar. They practiced medicine, often combining practical treatments with magical spells. The temple was not just a house of worship, but a repository of knowledge and culture. For ordinary Egyptians, the great state temples were distant and inaccessible, but they had their own religious practices. Household shrines honored domestic gods. Local chapels served neighborhood communities. Festivals brought color and excitement to towns. And the beliefs about the afterlife, judgment, and the need to live justly gave ethical structure to daily life. The gods were everywhere in Egyptian thought. They explained natural phenomena, from the sun's daily journey to the Nile's annual flood. They embodied abstract concepts like truth, wisdom, and chaos. They protected individuals and the nation. They set the moral standards by which people should live. They promised continued existence after death. This comprehensive religious worldview gave meaning and order to Egyptian life across 3 millennia. Medicine and science. Ancient Egyptians were keen observers of the natural world, and their practical knowledge laid foundations for later scientific thought. While they mixed empirical observation with magic and religion, they made significant advances in medicine, mathematics, and astronomy. Egyptian medicine was surprisingly sophisticated. Medical papyri, especially the Edwin Smith papyrus and the Ebers papyrus, reveal systematic approaches to diagnosis and treatment. The Edwin Smith papyrus, dating to around 1600 BCE, but copying older material, is a surgical treatise organized from head to toe. It describes 48 cases, each following a standard format. Title, examination, diagnosis, verdict, and treatment. For each case, the physician examines symptoms methodically. The text uses precise anatomical terms and describes techniques like palpation and measuring pulse. Diagnoses are classified as an ailment I will treat, an ailment I will contend with, or an ailment not to be treated, an honest acknowledgement that some conditions were beyond help. Treatments included practical methods, setting broken bones with splints, stitching wounds with thread, applying bandages soaked in medicinal compounds. Egyptian doctors recognized that the brain controlled the body, unusual for the ancient world. They knew that injuries to the head could cause paralysis or loss of speech in other parts of the body. They understood that pulse reflected heart function. The Ebers papyrus, a more general medical text, lists hundreds of remedies for various conditions: eye diseases, skin problems, digestive issues, and parasitic infections. Ingredients ranged from the sensible, like honey as an antibacterial, to the bizarre, like crocodile dung. Some remedies worked, others were probably ineffective, but psychologically comforting. Egyptian doctors specialized. Some treated only eyes, others only teeth, still others internal diseases. This specialization suggests a significant body of medical knowledge transmitted through apprenticeship. Doctors, trained under experienced practitioners, learning by observation and practice. Surgery was limited but real. Egyptians performed circumcision, removed tumors and cysts, and treated wounds and fractures. They understood the importance of cleanliness, washing wounds and using clean bandages. They knew how to reduce dislocated joints and set broken bones. Their success rate was probably respectable for pre-modern medicine. However, Egyptian medicine never separated completely from magic. Many treatments included spells recited while administering remedies. Amulets were prescribed alongside medicines. Illnesses might be attributed to angry spirits or divine punishment. A comprehensive treatment addressed both physical and spiritual aspects, combining practical medicine with magical protection. Dentistry was practiced, though dental health was often poor. The Egyptian diet, with bread ground from stone-milled grain, wore down teeth with grit and sand. Dental abscesses were common and painful. Some mummies show evidence of dental work, including drilled abscesses and gold wire used to stabilize loose teeth. Egyptian doctors understood some anatomy through mummification practice. Embalmers saw internal organs regularly. They noticed differences between healthy and diseased organs. This knowledge informed medical practice, though cultural taboos prevented systematic dissection for study, as would happen in later Greek and Roman medicine. Mathematics was well developed. The Moscow and Rhind mathematical papyri show that Egyptians could solve complex problems in arithmetic, geometry, and even early algebra. They used fractions, though only unit fractions, with 1 in the numerator. They calculated areas of triangles and rectangles, approximated the area of circles, and could find the volume of pyramids and cylinders. Egyptian mathematics was practical, oriented toward real-world problems. How much grain can a cylindrical granary hold? How many bricks are needed to build a ramp? How do you divide bread among workers fairly? These practical applications drove mathematical development. They used a decimal system without place value or zero, representing numbers with hieroglyphic symbols. Addition and subtraction were straightforward. Multiplication and division were done by doubling and halving. To multiply 32 times 19, they would double 19 repeatedly. 1 times 19 equals 19. 2 times 19 equals 38. 4 times 19 equals 76. And so on. Then they would add the appropriate doublings to reach 32 times 19. Geometry was essential for surveying land and designing buildings. After each Nile flood erased field boundaries, surveyors had to measure and re-establish property lines. They used knotted ropes as measuring tools, creating right angles with a rope divided into lengths of 3, 4, and 5 units, a practical application of what would later be called the Pythagorean theorem. The precision of pyramid construction shows advanced geometric knowledge. The proportions, the alignment with cardinal directions, the calculated angles, all required sophisticated mathematical understanding. Whether through empirical experience or theoretical knowledge, Egyptian builders achieved results that still impress engineers today. Astronomy developed for religious and practical purposes. The Egyptians needed a calendar to predict the Nile's flood and time religious festivals. They created a solar calendar of 365 days, divided into 12 months of 30 days, plus 5 extra days. This was remarkably accurate, though it slowly drifted out of sync with the actual solar year by about 1 day every 4 years. They also observed a lunar calendar for religious purposes, since many festivals were tied to lunar phases. Coordinating these two calendars required careful astronomical observation. Egyptian priests tracked stars and planets. They noticed that certain stars rose just before sunrise at specific times of year. The heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, coincided with the Nile's flood, making it especially important. This star was identified with the goddess Sopdet, and its appearance marked the new year in the civil calendar. They divided the night into hours, though these were not fixed lengths but varied with the season. Star clocks in tomb ceilings showed which stars rose at which hours, allowing priests to tell time at night. This was important for performing nighttime rituals at the correct moments. The Egyptians recognized 5 planets visible to the naked eye and associated them with gods. They mapped constellations, though their star groups differed from the Greek constellations we use today. They understood that celestial events followed regular patterns, even if they explained these patterns through mythology rather than physical laws. Technology served practical needs. Egyptian metallurgy produced copper and bronze tools, though iron remained rare and precious until the late period. Glassmaking was practiced, creating beautiful vessels and beads. Faience, a glazed ceramic material, was molded into amulets, jewelry, and decorative objects in brilliant blues and greens. Textile production was highly developed. Linen of astonishing fineness was woven, some so sheer it was nearly transparent. Dyeing techniques created colored fabrics, though most Egyptian linen remained its natural off-white. Pleating techniques created elegant effects in clothing. Engineering achievements are evident in the monuments, moving and placing stone blocks weighing tons, quarrying and transporting obelisks that were single pieces of granite weighing hundreds of tons, building massive temples and tombs. All required practical engineering knowledge passed down through generations of craftsmen and architects. Boat building was a crucial technology. Egyptian boats ranged from small papyrus reed rafts to large wooden ships capable of sea voyages. The absence of good timber in Egypt meant wood had to be imported, making large wooden ships luxury items. But the Egyptians became skilled boat builders, using advanced joinery techniques to construct vessels from short planks. Time measurement developed for religious and administrative purposes. Water clocks, vessels with measured markings that tracked time by the level of water dripping out, allowed timekeeping both day and night. Sundials measured daytime hours, using shadows cast by the sun. All this knowledge was empirical, learned through observation and experience rather than experimental science as we understand it. The Egyptians did not develop scientific theory or abstract mathematical proofs. They were practical, solving problems that arose in daily life and religious practice. But their practical knowledge was extensive and effective allowing them to create a sophisticated civilization that functioned successfully for thousands of years. The military and expansion. Egypt is often imagined as a peaceful civilization focused on religion and monuments. But military power was essential to its survival and prosperity. The pharaoh was a warrior king, expected to defend Egypt and expand its borders. Military campaigns brought wealth in tribute and captives, while military failures could destabilize the kingdom. Early Egypt relied on militia levies, farmers called to serve when needed. These part-time soldiers brought their own weapons and returned to their farms after campaigns. Officers came from the nobility, who trained in warfare as part of their education. This system worked adequately against neighbors like Nubia to the south and Libya to the west. As Egypt's ambitions grew during the New Kingdom, a professional military emerged. Standing armies included career soldiers who trained regularly. Specialist units formed: archers, spearmen, charioteers. Foreign mercenaries supplemented Egyptian troops, bringing different fighting styles and skills. Nubians were valued as archers. Libyans and sea peoples served as infantry. Shardana warriors, possibly from Sardinia, became elite guards. The chariot revolutionized Egyptian warfare in the New Kingdom. Adopted from Western Asian peoples who had invaded Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period, chariots became the elite strike force of Egyptian armies. Light, fast vehicles drawn by 2 horses carried a driver and an archer or spearman. Chariot squadrons could maneuver rapidly, attacking enemy flanks or pursuing fleeing soldiers. Chariot warfare required extensive training. Drivers had to control horses at speed, while archers had to shoot accurately from a moving platform. The horses themselves needed training and care. Chariots required maintenance and repair. This expensive, specialized force was a mark of military prestige. Infantry remained the backbone of armies. Soldiers fought with spears, axes, and swords, protected by large shields. Archers, armed with composite bows that could shoot arrows hundreds of yards, provided ranged support. Massed formations of infantry, supported by archers and chariots, made up Egyptian battle tactics. Fortifications protected Egypt's borders. A line of forts along the eastern delta defended against Asian invasion. Forts in Nubia secured Egypt's southern frontier and controlled trade routes. These strongholds, built of mud, brick, or stone, could house garrisons, store supplies, and serve as bases for military operations. Egypt's most famous military campaigns occurred during the New Kingdom. Thutmose III, who ruled in the 15th century BCE, conducted 17 campaigns into Syria and Palestine, establishing Egyptian dominance over the region. The Battle of Megiddo, his first campaign, became legendary. Facing a coalition of Canaanite kings, Thutmose chose a risky mountain pass to surprise his enemies. The gamble succeeded, and the Egyptians won a decisive victory. Ramesses II, perhaps Egypt's most famous warrior pharaoh, fought the Hittites for control of Syria. The Battle of Kadesh, fought around 1274 BCE, was one of the ancient world's largest chariot battles. Thousands of soldiers clashed in brutal fighting. Ramesses claimed a great victory. covering temple walls with scenes of his heroism. Hittite records tell a different story, suggesting the battle was a draw or even a Hittite victory. What is certain is that neither side achieved decisive victory. Years later, Egypt and the Hittites signed a peace treaty, one of history's oldest surviving diplomatic documents, ending their conflict and establishing a border. Military campaigns brought economic benefits. Defeated enemies paid tribute. Gold, silver, copper, horses, cattle, slaves. Cities were plundered of valuables. Prisoners of war were put to work in Egypt, building monuments or working fields. This influx of wealth and labor enriched the kingdom and funded more building projects. Nubia to the south was a frequent target. Rich in gold and other resources, Nubia attracted repeated Egyptian invasions. Eventually, Egypt conquered Nubia and held it for centuries, extracting its wealth and imposing Egyptian culture. Nubian princes were brought to Egypt to be educated as Egyptians, ensuring their loyalty when they returned to rule their homelands as Egyptian vassals. Naval warfare existed, though less developed than land combat. Egypt built warships to patrol the Nile and defend coastal areas. Sea Peoples invasions in the 12th century BCE prompted naval battles, depicted in temple reliefs, showing Egyptian ships ramming enemy vessels and archers shooting from decks. Soldiers received payment in land grants and rations. Veterans were awarded plots of farmland, ensuring their loyalty and providing for their retirement. Officers received gold rewards for valor, prestigious honors depicted in their tomb decorations. Military service offered opportunities for advancement, especially for men from humble backgrounds who might distinguish themselves in battle. The pharaoh's role as military leader was central to kingship. Even if a pharaoh did not personally lead armies, he was depicted as warrior. Temple walls showed pharaohs smiting enemies, riding chariots into battle, returning victorious with captives. These scenes were partly propaganda, establishing the pharaoh as defender of Egypt and maintainer of cosmic order by defeating chaos in the form of foreign enemies. Warfare had a dark side. Prisoners were enslaved, separated from families, and put to hard labor. Defeated cities might be destroyed, populations killed or deported. The hieroglyphic sign for foreigner was a bound captive, revealing Egyptian attitudes toward those outside their civilization. While Egypt traded with neighbors and employed foreign mercenaries, there was a sense that only Egypt was truly civilized. Yet military power had limits. Egypt's army was formidable within its region, but could not project power indefinitely. Supply lines stretched thin on distant campaigns. Subject peoples rebelled when Egyptian control weakened. Stronger enemies, like the Hittites, or later the Assyrians and Persians, could challenge Egyptian dominance. By the late period, Egypt increasingly relied on foreign mercenaries. Greek and Carian soldiers served Egyptian pharaohs. This reliance showed both Egypt's wealth, which could pay for these troops, and its declining native military strength. Eventually, foreign powers conquered Egypt, ending its independence first to Persians, then to Greeks, and finally to Romans. The military was always intertwined with religion. Before battle, priests sought divine favor through prayers and offerings. Victory was attributed to the god's support. Captured booty was dedicated to temples. The pharaoh's military success proved he maintained Maat and deserved the god's blessings. Defeat suggested divine disfavor, potentially threatening the pharaoh's legitimacy. Despite its warlike side, Egypt was not constantly at war. Long periods of peace allowed focus on building and culture. The military's purpose was defensive as much as aggressive, protecting the Nile Valley from invasion and maintaining order. When Egypt was strong, it dominated neighbors. When it was weak, it retreated to its borders and focused on survival. This rhythm of expansion and contraction marked Egyptian history for centuries. Art and beauty. Egyptian art is immediately recognizable, with its distinctive style maintained across thousands of years. Figures shown in composite view, head and legs in profile, but torso frontal. Scenes arranged in horizontal registers, hierarchical scale with important figures larger than less important ones, vibrant colors preserved in tomb paintings. This art was not meant simply to decorate, but served religious and magical purposes, ensuring eternal life for the deceased and honoring the gods. Art followed strict conventions. Scribes and artists learned these rules in workshop training. Standard proportions determined how to draw a human figure. A squared grid helped maintain correct proportions. A standing figure was 18 squares tall, the knee at square 6, the navel at square 11, the shoulders at square 16. This system ensured consistency and harmony. The composite view was deliberate, not primitive. Egyptian artists could draw in perspective when they wanted to, as seen in some informal sketches. But formal art used the composite view because it showed each part of the body from its most recognizable angle. The face is most recognizable in profile, but the eye is most recognizable from the front, so they drew a frontal eye on a profile face. Shoulders are clearest from the front, while legs are clearer from the side. The result may look odd to modern eyes, but it efficiently communicated complete information. Colors had symbolic meanings. Gold represented the flesh of the gods, divine and eternal. Red suggested life and energy, but also chaos and desert. Black represented fertility and rebirth, the color of the Nile's rich silt. Green symbolized growth and resurrection. Blue connected to the sky and water, to none the primordial ocean. White suggested purity and sacredness. Artists chose colors not just for appearance, but for meaning. Tomb paintings showed the deceased's life and hopes for the afterlife. Banquet scenes depicted feasting and entertainment. Agricultural scenes showed fields being plowed and harvested, ensuring the deceased would have food in eternity. Craftsmen at work, fishermen and fowlers in the marshes, processions of offering bearers, all guaranteed the continuation of life's pleasures. These were not merely illustrations, but magical guarantees. By showing something on the tomb wall, it became real in the afterlife. Sculptors created works of remarkable skill. Colossal statues like the seated figures of Ramesses II at Abu Simbel, each over 60 feet tall, carved from living rock, inspire awe. Delicate small sculptures in wood or ivory show incredible attention to detail. Portrait sculptures of pharaohs and nobles capture individual features while maintaining idealized beauty. Egyptian sculpture follows a principle of frontality. Statues look straight ahead, arms at sides or hands resting on knees. This formality conveys eternal stability. But within these conventions, sculptors showed great skill. The subtlety of facial modeling, the careful rendering of muscles and bones, the smooth polish of stone surfaces, all demonstrate mastery of their craft. The Egyptians worked with many materials. Limestone, relatively soft, was easy to carve and commonly used. Sandstone, also widespread in Egypt, served for large structures. Granite, extremely hard, was reserved for important works that needed to endure. Basalt, diorite, and quartzite were also used. Each stone had characteristics that sculptors learned to exploit. Wood was scarce and valuable in Egypt, but used for smaller sculptures and furniture. Craftsmen carved intricate details in wood, sometimes covering it with gold leaf or painting it brightly. Ivory from elephant tusks or hippopotamus teeth was carved into small, precious objects. Bronze was cast into statues of gods and animals. Gold, abundant from Nubian mines, was hammered into masks, jewelry, and decorative elements. Jewelry was art form and protective magic. Gold necklaces, bracelets, rings, earrings, and pectorals were worn by wealthy Egyptians. Inlaid with semi-precious stones, colored glass, and faience, these pieces combined beauty with symbolism. Amulets shaped like scarabs, the eye of Horus, the Ankh symbol of life, or various gods, offered magical protection. Even practical items, like mirrors or cosmetic containers, were beautifully crafted. Cosmetics were important to Egyptians of both sexes. Black eye paint, made from galena, lined eyes in the distinctive Egyptian style we recognize from art. Green eye paint, from malachite, was also used. These cosmetics had practical purposes, reducing glare from the bright sun and repelling flies, but also aesthetic and religious significance. Eyes were windows to the soul and deserved decoration and protection. Hairstyles and wigs were elaborate. Wealthy Egyptians often shaved their heads for cleanliness and wore wigs on formal occasions. These wigs, made from human hair or plant fibers, could be elaborately styled and decorated. Different wig styles indicated social status and fashion. Children wore distinctive side-lock hairstyles. Priests shaved all body hair for ritual purity. Clothing was mostly linen, white or natural colored. The wealthy wore fine, pleated linen that flowed elegantly. Men typically wore kilts or skirts. Women wore long dresses, often with straps over one or both shoulders. Children often went naked in warm weather. Shoes were sandals made from papyrus or leather, though many people went barefoot most of the time. Fashion changed over time. Old Kingdom clothing was simple. Middle Kingdom styles became more elaborate. New Kingdom fashion featured pleated and draped garments of remarkable complexity, with flowing robes and elaborate accessories. Royal clothing incorporated gold thread, beadwork, and precious stones. Architecture, was the grandest art form. Temples and tombs, built to last forever, showcased Egyptian aesthetics and engineering. Massive pylons at temple entrances, forests of columns in hypostyle halls, precise stone masonry fitted so tightly that a knife blade cannot slip between blocks, all demonstrated skill and dedication. Columns were not merely structural, but decorative. Papyrus columns had capitals shaped like papyrus flowers, open or closed. Lotus columns resembled the lotus flower. Palm columns imitated palm trees. These plant forms connected temples to creation mythology, evoking the primordial marsh from which life arose. Relief carvings covered temple walls, depicting religious rituals, pharaohs offering to gods, and mythological scenes. These reliefs were painted in bright colors, most now faded or lost. The few traces that remain suggest how vibrant temples must have been, every surface colored and detailed. Artists were not autonomous creators, but skilled craftsmen working for patrons. They followed templates and conventions, working in teams to complete large projects. Individual creativity existed within the system, but the goal was not innovation, but perfection of established forms. This explains the remarkable consistency of Egyptian art across centuries. Yet art did evolve. Early styles were more rigid. Middle Kingdom art showed more naturalism. The Amarna period under Akhenaten broke conventions radically, showing figures with unusual proportions, relaxed poses, and intimate family scenes never depicted before. After Akhenaten, art returned to traditional forms, but retained some naturalistic influences. Art served the eternal, not the moment. It was meant to last forever, providing for the deceased in the afterlife, and honoring the gods for eternity. This purpose shaped every choice artists made, from the materials they used to the conventions they followed. Egyptian art achieved its goal remarkably well. Thousands of years later, it still conveys the power, beauty, and mystery of one of history's greatest civilizations, the Valley of the Kings. During the New Kingdom, pharaohs abandoned pyramid building in favor of hidden rock-cut tombs in a remote desert valley near Thebes. This place became known as the Valley of the Kings, the final resting place for Egypt's mightiest rulers over a period of 500 years. The valley is a desolate, barren place, surrounded by cliffs and dominated by a pyramid-shaped mountain called El Kern. The ancient Egyptians saw this natural pyramid as sacred, perhaps making the valley seem an appropriate burial ground. Its isolation offered security, or so pharaohs hoped, against tomb robbers who had plundered the accessible pyramids. The first pharaoh to use the valley was probably Thutmose I, around 1500 BCE. His architect, Ineni, recorded that he supervised the king's tomb excavation in secret, no one seeing, no one hearing. This secrecy was crucial. If robbers knew where a tomb was and what it contained, they would find a way to plunder it. Tombs in the valley were cut deep into the bedrock. Corridors descended at angles, sometimes over 500 feet into the earth. Chambers opened off these corridors, rooms for storing grave goods, chapels for ritual, and finally the burial chamber containing the sarcophagus. Walls were covered with religious texts and images. Scenes from the Amduat, the book of what is in the underworld, showing the sun god's nighttime journey. Excerpts from the Book of the Dead, depictions of the pharaoh meeting gods. Excavating these tombs required immense labor. Workers cut through solid rock using copper chisels and stone hammers. They removed debris by basket, hauling it out through narrow passages. They plastered walls and painted them with elaborate scenes. Skilled artisans spent years completing a single tomb. The workers who built these tombs lived in the nearby village of Deir el-Medina. This community was isolated to keep the tomb's locations secret. Workers and their families lived together, supplied with rations by the state. They were well paid by ancient standards, receiving substantial grain rations, plus valuable goods like oil and fish. Their village has been extensively excavated, revealing much about their lives. Despite precautions, nearly every tomb in the Valley of the Kings was robbed in antiquity. Thieves, probably including some who worked on the tombs, broke in through secret passages or simply by tunneling through rock. They stole gold, jewelry, and anything valuable, often ransacking mummies in search of amulets and gold. Some robberies occurred within years of the burial, suggesting inside information. Tomb robbery was serious crime. Records describe trials of accused robbers who were tortured to extract confessions. Punishments were severe, likely including execution. Yet the temptation was too great. A single royal tomb contained wealth beyond imagination, enough to make a poor man rich for life if he could steal and sell just a fraction of it. By the end of the New Kingdom, the situation had deteriorated. Royal authority weakened. The government could no longer protect the tombs. Priests gathered mummies from plundered tombs and hid them in secret caches to protect them from further desecration. The most famous cache, discovered in 1881 at Deir el-Bahari, contained mummies of many great pharaohs: Ahmose, Amenhotep I, Thutmose III, Ramesses II, and others. Another cache found in 1998 in the tomb of Amenhotep II held more royal mummies. These mummies, stripped of their treasures but still preserved, were found thousands of years later by archaeologists. They now rest in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, their faces visible to anyone who visits. Pharaohs who once commanded absolute power now lie in glass cases, viewed by tourists. It is a strange fate, yet perhaps they would appreciate being remembered. For an Egyptian, to be forgotten was the ultimate death. The Valley of the Kings became a tourist attraction in ancient times. Greek and Roman travelers visited, leaving graffiti on tomb walls that we can still read. These ancient tourists marveled at the tombs just as modern visitors do, though they did not understand the hieroglyphic texts they saw. In modern times, the valley became the focus of intense archaeological interest. Early excavators, more treasure hunters than scientists, plundered tombs for museums and private collections. Gradually, more scientific approaches developed. Systematic excavation and recording became standard. Today, the valley is carefully managed as a precious archaeological site and major tourist destination. The most famous discovery in the Valley of the Kings was Tutankhamun's tomb, found by Howard Carter in 1922. Unlike other royal tombs, which had been thoroughly plundered, Tutankhamun's was found largely intact. The discovery caused a worldwide sensation. Carter's search had lasted years, funded by Lord Carnarvon, an English aristocrat fascinated by Egypt. On the verge of giving up, Carter found a step cut into the bedrock, hidden under debris from another tomb. More steps led down to a sealed doorway bearing Tutankhamun's name. Carter broke a small hole in the door and peered inside by candlelight. When Carnarvon asked if he could see anything, Carter replied with words that became famous. "Yes, wonderful things." The tomb contained 4 chambers packed with treasures: gold chariots, furniture, weapons, clothing, jewelry, chests full of objects, everything the young king might need in the afterlife. In the burial chamber, 3 nested coffins held the mummy. The innermost coffin made of solid gold weighing over 200 pounds. The mummy's head was covered with a golden death mask, perhaps the most iconic image of ancient Egypt. The young pharaoh's idealized face gazing serenely into eternity. Clearing the tomb took Carter nearly 10 years. Every object had to be carefully documented, preserved, and removed. Many items were fragile, having lain untouched for over 3,000 years. Carter's meticulous work set new standards for archaeological excavation and recording. The treasures were eventually housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, where they drew massive crowds. Traveling exhibitions of Tutankhamun's treasures became the most popular museum shows ever held, introducing millions worldwide to ancient Egyptian art and culture. The King Tut phenomenon made Egyptology mainstream, inspiring new generations to study the ancient world. Ironically, Tutankhamun was a minor pharaoh who died young, around 18 years old, after a short reign. He is famous today only because his tomb survived relatively intact. Had he lived longer and been buried in a grander tomb, it would likely have been plundered like the others, and we might barely know his name. Sometimes history's accidents determine what we remember. The Valley of the Kings continues to reveal secrets. In recent decades, new tombs and chambers have been discovered using modern technology, like ground-penetrating radar. Some suspect that more tombs remain hidden, perhaps including that of Ankhesenamun, Tutankhamun's queen, or other royal burials not yet found. The valley is also threatened. Tourism, while economically important, damages the fragile paintings and structures. Humidity from visitors' breath deteriorates wall paintings. Touching walls transfers oils that damage art. Efforts to preserve the tombs while allowing access require constant balancing. Some tombs have been closed to visitors, with only replicas open to preserve the originals. The Valley of the Kings represents ancient Egypt's determination to achieve immortality through elaborate burial. Pharaohs invested enormous resources in their tombs, creating masterpieces of art and architecture meant to last forever. Though robbers stole the treasures and time damaged the structures, the tombs remain, testaments to the power and beliefs of the people who created them. Walking through the valley today, under the blazing sun and barren cliffs, one can almost feel the presence of the past, the weight of thousands of years pressing down the whisper of ancient voices speaking across time. The Ptolemies and Cleopatra. Egypt's native pharaohs ruled for nearly 3,000 years, but in 332 BCE, the country fell to foreign conquest. Alexander the Great, the Macedonian king who conquered much of the known world, entered Egypt and was welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule. When Alexander died suddenly in 323 BCE, his vast empire was divided among his generals. Egypt fell to Ptolemy, who founded a dynasty that would rule for nearly 300 years. The Ptolemies were Greeks, not Egyptians. They spoke Greek, worshipped Greek gods, and brought Greek culture to Egypt. Yet they also adopted pharaonic traditions, presenting themselves as legitimate Egyptian rulers. They built temples in Egyptian style, had themselves depicted in traditional pharaonic regalia, and supported ancient cults. This dual identity, Greek and Egyptian, characterized Ptolemaic Egypt. Alexandria, founded by Alexander on the Mediterranean coast, became the capital and one of the ancient world's greatest cities. It was thoroughly Greek in character, with magnificent public buildings, theaters, gymnasiums, and temples. The Great Library of Alexandria, established under the early Ptolemies, aimed to collect all the world's knowledge. Scholars from across the Mediterranean came to study there, making Alexandria a center of learning and culture. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, stood over 400 feet tall, guiding ships into the busy harbor. This engineering marvel, like the library, symbolized the Ptolemies' ambition and wealth. Egypt's agricultural richness made it the Mediterranean's breadbasket, and the Ptolemies exploited this wealth to fund their grand projects. Greek settlers came to Egypt, receiving land grants and administrative positions. 2 cultures coexisted, sometimes mixing, often remaining separate. Greek was the language of government and educated elite. Egyptian remained the language of the majority. Greek and Egyptian temples stood side by side. Greek philosophical schools taught in Alexandria, while Egyptian priests maintained ancient traditions in temple complexes up the Nile. The Ptolemies maintained powerful armies and navies, fighting wars with rival Hellenistic kingdoms for control of eastern Mediterranean territories. They ruled Cyprus, parts of coastal Asia Minor, and briefly lands in Syria and Palestine. Egypt's wealth funded these military adventures, though with mixed success. Internal politics were brutal. Ptolemaic family members murdered each other with disturbing regularity. Brothers fought brothers for the throne. Wives poisoned husbands. Children were caught in deadly power struggles. The tradition of sibling marriage, adopted from pharaonic custom to keep the bloodline pure, created complicated family dynamics. Ptolemaic queens were often powerful figures, ruling alongside or sometimes over their royal husbands and brothers. Cleopatra VII, the last Ptolemaic ruler, was born in 69 BCE into this world of intrigue and violence. Highly educated, fluent in multiple languages including Egyptian, rare for Ptolemies, she was intelligent and politically astute. Ancient sources describe her not as physically beautiful, but as charming and charismatic, able to win people through conversation and personality. Cleopatra came to power at 17, initially co-ruling with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, whom she married according to custom. But Ptolemy's advisors opposed Cleopatra, and civil war erupted. Into this situation arrived Julius Caesar, pursuing his rival Pompey into Egypt. When Pompey was murdered by Ptolemy's advisors, Caesar was horrified by the dishonorable act. Cleopatra seized her chance. In a famous story, she had herself smuggled to Caesar, rolled in a carpet, or more likely a linen sack, and presented as a gift. The dramatic entrance worked. Caesar was charmed. He supported Cleopatra against her brother, besieging Alexandria until Ptolemy died, drowned in the Nile fleeing battle. Cleopatra was restored to power, now co-ruling with another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, but in reality ruling alone with Caesar's backing. Cleopatra and Caesar became lovers. She bore him a son, Caesarion, whom she claimed was Caesar's heir. She visited Rome, living in Caesar's villa, scandalizing conservative Romans with her foreign ways and pretensions. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Cleopatra hurried back to Egypt, her position uncertain. Rome descended into civil war between Caesar's assassins and his avengers. Mark Antony, one of Caesar's lieutenants, took control of Rome's eastern territories. He summoned Cleopatra to meet him, supposedly to answer charges of supporting Caesar's enemies. Cleopatra arrived in spectacular fashion, sailing up the river in a golden barge dressed as the goddess Aphrodite. Antony was captivated. Antony and Cleopatra's relationship was political and personal. She needed his protection and support. He needed Egypt's wealth to fund his military campaigns. They became allies, lovers, and eventually spouses in an Egyptian ceremony not recognized by Roman law. They had 3 children together. For a decade, Antony and Cleopatra lived between Alexandria and the eastern provinces. Antony gave Cleopatra territories that expanded her kingdom, restoring something of ancient Egypt's glory. They held court in magnificent style, presenting themselves as divine rulers. Antony as Dionysus, Cleopatra as Isis. This eastern grandeur horrified Romans, who saw Antony abandoning Roman values for foreign decadence. Antony's rival was Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir and future emperor Augustus. The conflict between them was inevitable. Octavian portrayed it as Rome versus Egypt, civilization versus barbarism, though in reality it was 2 Roman warlords fighting for supremacy. Octavian's propaganda painted Cleopatra as an evil seductress who had enslaved Antony with her witchcraft, leading him to betray Rome. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet faced Octavian's in a naval battle off western Greece. The battle went badly. Cleopatra's ships broke off and fled back to Egypt. Antony followed her, abandoning his remaining forces, which surrendered to Octavian. It was a devastating defeat. Octavian pursued them to Egypt. Antony, receiving false news that Cleopatra had killed herself, fell on his sword. Mortally wounded, he was brought to Cleopatra, dying in her arms. Octavian captured Alexandria without much resistance. Cleopatra tried to negotiate. even attempting to charm Octavian as she had Caesar and Antony. But he was immune to her allure. He planned to bring her to Rome as a captive to display in his triumph the ultimate humiliation. Cleopatra chose death. She arranged her own suicide, likely by poison. The romantic story of death by asp is probably legend. She died on August 12, 30 BCE, at age 39. With her death, Ptolemaic Egypt ended. Egypt became a Roman province, no longer an independent kingdom. The age of the pharaohs was over after 3,000 years. Octavian had Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Caesar, murdered, eliminating a potential rival. Cleopatra's children by Antony were spared and raised in Rome by Antony's Roman widow. One daughter married an African king, and it is said that through her, Cleopatra's bloodline continued. Rome valued Egypt primarily for its grain. The province became the emperor's personal property, so important that no senator could visit without permission. Egyptian grain fed Rome's population, preventing famine and unrest. Roman engineering improved irrigation and agriculture, maximizing productivity. Egypt prospered economically under Roman rule, though it was no longer independent. Egyptian culture continued under Roman occupation. Temples still functioned, priests still performed ancient rituals, people still worshipped the old gods. The Romans were generally respectful of Egyptian religion, even building new temples in traditional Egyptian style. The Temple of Dendera, with its famous zodiac ceiling, was completed under Roman rule. The Temple of Isis at Philae remained active for centuries, but changes were inevitable. Greek and Roman culture increasingly influenced Egypt. Christianity, spreading through the Roman Empire, reached Egypt early. Egyptian Christians, called Copts, developed their own traditions, blending Egyptian and Christian elements. By the 4th century CE, Christianity was the dominant religion, and the old gods were being abandoned. The last hieroglyphic inscription was carved in 394 CE at the Temple of Isis at Philae. The last demotic inscription followed in 452 CE. After that, no one could read or write the ancient scripts. The temples closed, converted to churches, or abandoned. The knowledge of thousands of years was lost. Egypt's ancient civilization had come to an end. Yet in another sense, it never ended. Egyptian monuments remained, mysterious and imposing. Greek and Roman writers preserved Egyptian history and myths. Medieval Arab scholars studied the pyramids and temples with wonder. Renaissance Europeans rediscovered Egypt through ancient texts. Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in 1798 brought scholars who documented monuments and artifacts, sparking modern Egyptology. The Rosetta Stone, found during Napoleon's expedition, eventually unlocked hieroglyphics, allowing modern scholars to read ancient Egyptian texts. Excavations uncovered cities, tombs, and treasures. Museums filled with Egyptian artifacts. The world became fascinated with ancient Egypt, its art, religion, and mysterious history. Today, Egypt's ancient monuments are among humanity's most visited heritage sites. The pyramids at Giza welcome millions of tourists. The temples at Luxor and Karnak inspire awe. Museums worldwide display Egyptian collections. Documentaries and books about ancient Egypt remain perennially popular. The civilization that ended over 1,500 years ago continues to captivate the modern world. Cleopatra herself became a legend, her story told and retold through literature, opera, film. Shakespeare wrote his Antony and Cleopatra. Elizabeth Taylor portrayed her in Hollywood's most expensive film of its time. She has become a symbol of beauty, power, intelligence, and tragedy. The real Cleopatra, ambitious ruler trying to preserve her kingdom in impossible circumstances, is perhaps more interesting than the legend, but both endure. The Ptolemaic period represents both an ending and a transformation. Native Egyptian rule ended, but Egyptian culture influenced the Hellenistic and Roman worlds. Egyptian gods were worshipped across the Mediterranean. Isis became one of the Roman Empire's most popular deities. Egyptian art styles influenced Greek and Roman artists. Egyptian knowledge, especially in mathematics and medicine, spread through the classical world. In some ways, the Ptolemies and Cleopatra mark the final chapter of ancient Egypt's story. In other ways, they show how ancient Egypt never truly died but transformed and spread, its influences rippling through subsequent civilizations down to our own time. The last pharaoh was Greek, the language of government Greek and Roman, but the land remained Egypt, shaped by the Nile, heir to thousands of years of accumulated culture. That heritage could not be erased, even by conquest. The mystery of the pyramids. We return to where we began, to the pyramids that have captivated human imagination for millennia. These structures are so impressive, so precisely built, that wild theories have flourished about how they were created. Ancient astronauts, lost civilizations with advanced technology, mysterious powers, all have been proposed as explanations. The truth is both simpler and more impressive. The pyramids were built by human beings, using human ingenuity. The Great Pyramid of Khufu contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. Some blocks weigh much more, up to 15 tons in the king's chamber, and even heavier for the granite beams above it. How did ancient Egyptians quarry, transport, and place these blocks? Quarrying used copper tools, stone hammers, and wooden wedges. Workers cut channels around blocks, inserted wooden wedges, and soaked them with water. The expanding wood split the stone. For harder stones like granite, they used pounding with dolerite balls. Extremely time-consuming, but effective. Quarry sites show the marks of these tools and techniques. Transportation exploited the Nile. Stones from distant quarries came by boat during the flood season, when the river was high. Harbors near construction sites allowed unloading. Overland, workers dragged blocks on wooden sledges, often wetting the sand ahead of the sledge to reduce friction. Experiments have shown this technique works effectively. At the construction site, blocks had to be raised into position. No one knows exactly how the Egyptians accomplished this, as they left no written descriptions of their methods. Various theories exist. Ramps seem most likely. These could have been straight ramps, spiral ramps, winding around the pyramid. or internal ramps built within the structure itself. Recent evidence suggests combinations of these methods might have been used. The precision of construction is remarkable. The Great Pyramid's base is level to within 1 inch, an incredible achievement over a 756-foot length. How did they achieve this? Water-filled trenches provided a level reference. By cutting the bedrock to the same depth below the water surface all around, they created a level base. The alignment to true north is accurate to within 1/15th of a degree. Astronomers studying stars could achieve this. The Egyptians might have observed the rising and setting points of stars, or used circumpolar stars that never set, creating alignment techniques we can only guess at. The blocks fit together so tightly that mortar was barely needed, and was used mainly to facilitate sliding blocks into place, not to hold them together. This precision came from careful dressing of stones, skilled masons creating smooth surfaces that fitted perfectly. Inside, the Great Pyramid contains extraordinary features. The Grand Gallery, rising at a sharp angle with a corbelled ceiling nearly 30 feet high, is an architectural marvel. The King's Chamber has a flat ceiling made of 9 enormous granite beams, each weighing many tons. Above this are 5 relieving chambers, designed to distribute the immense weight of the pyramid away from the burial chamber below. The purpose of various shafts and passages remains debated. Some aligned with specific stars, perhaps intended as passageways for the pharaoh's soul. Others might have served construction purposes or religious symbolism we do not fully understand. The pyramid's internal architecture is complex and evidently deeply meaningful to its builders. The Great Pyramid was originally encased in polished white limestone, making it gleam in the sun. This casing is mostly gone, stripped away over centuries for building materials, but a few blocks remain at the top, showing how magnificent it once looked. Ancient writers described seeing their reflections in the polished surfaces. The pyramid was crowned with a pyramidion, probably gilded, completing the structure. Surrounding the pyramid was a complex of smaller pyramids for queens, boat pits containing dismantled boats, perhaps for the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife, a mortuary temple, and a causeway leading to a valley temple near the Nile. The whole complex served the pharaoh's afterlife needs. The construction timeline is debated. Traditional estimates suggest 20 to 23 years to build the Great Pyramid. This seems impossibly fast given the number of blocks, but the math works if enough workers labored simultaneously. During the flood season, when farming stopped, perhaps 20 to 30,000 workers were available. They could have placed the necessary number of blocks per day, especially in the early years when the pyramid was low, and blocks did not need to be raised high. Workers' villages near the pyramids have been excavated. These show how laborers were housed and fed. Enormous bakeries produced bread, breweries made beer, butchers processed cattle, sheep, and fish. The logistics of feeding and managing tens of thousands of workers required sophisticated organization. The social organization this implies is as impressive as the engineering. Someone had to plan the work, coordinate teams, ensure supplies arrived on time, resolve disputes, and maintain morale. This required bureaucracy, record-keeping, and management skills we sometimes forget ancient peoples possessed. Recent theories suggest that pyramid building was not harsh slave labor, but a unifying national project. Workers took pride in their efforts, knowing they were building something eternal. The pyramids became symbols of Egyptian civilization, demonstrations of what organized human effort could achieve. Other pyramids show experimental stages. The bent pyramid at Dashur changes angle partway up, perhaps because the builders feared the original steep angle was unstable. The red pyramid, also at Dashur, uses the shallower angle throughout, learning from the bent pyramid's problems. These show trial and error, learning from experience, adapting techniques. Not all pyramids survived intact. Many have collapsed or deteriorated into rubble mounds. The pyramids at Giza survived because they were well built and made of solid stone, but also because they became tourist attractions early, giving people incentive to preserve them. Pyramids in more remote locations were quarried for stone, their facing blocks and even core stones removed for later building projects. Modern technology confirms the pyramid's precision while deepening mysteries. Ground-penetrating radar and cosmic ray muons have scanned pyramid interiors, searching for hidden chambers. Some anomalies have been detected, suggesting possible voids, but investigations are ongoing. Perhaps more rooms await discovery, perhaps not. The pyramids have survived wars, earthquakes, weathering, and millennia of human activity. They remain monuments to human achievement, testaments to what ancient peoples accomplished with simple tools, muscle power, and brilliant minds. They inspire us still, reminding us that our ancestors were not primitive but capable of extraordinary things. Standing before the Great Pyramid, it is easy to feel small. This enormous pile of stone, arranged with mathematical precision, built 4,500 years ago, transcends individual human life. The men who built it knew they were creating something that would outlast them, their children, and countless generations. They succeeded. The pyramid remains, and through it, so do they. The Nile today and Egypt's legacy. The Nile still flows through Egypt, still flooding, though now controlled by modern dams, still giving life to the desert. Modern Egypt occupies the same land as ancient Egypt, and Egyptians today are descended from ancient Egyptians, though mixed with Greeks, Romans, Arabs, and others who came over the centuries. The Aswan High Dam, built in the 1960s, controls the Nile's flood. This brings benefits: reliable water for irrigation, hydroelectric power, protection from catastrophic floods. But it also means that the annual silt deposition has stopped. Farmers now need chemical fertilizers. The Nile Delta is eroding without constant replenishment of sediment. Lake Nasser, the enormous reservoir behind the dam, covers what was once Nubia, submerging ancient sites and displacing populations. Before the dam was completed, UNESCO organized a massive international effort to save Nubia's monuments. The temples at Abu Simbel, carved into a cliff face by Ramesses II, were cut into blocks and reassembled on higher ground, a modern engineering feat rivaling the ancient construction. Other temples were similarly saved or moved to museums. Not everything could be rescued, and much Nubian heritage was lost beneath the lake's waters. Modern Egypt faces challenges. A rapidly growing population strains resources. Most Egyptians still live along the Nile, crowded into a narrow green strip in a vast desert country. Cairo, one of the world's most populous cities, spreads across what were once farmlands and even encroaches on ancient sites. The pyramids at Giza now have suburbs practically touching them. Tourism is crucial to Egypt's economy. Millions visit each year to see the pyramids, temples, and museums. This brings income and international attention, but also threatens the monuments. Managing tourism to preserve sites while allowing access is an ongoing challenge. Some tombs are closed to protect them, with replicas opened instead. Political instability has sometimes disrupted tourism. Economic difficulties make preservation and archaeological work harder. Yet Egypt continues to protect and study its heritage. Egyptian archaeologists, trained at universities in Egypt and abroad, lead excavations and manage antiquities. The field is no longer dominated by foreigners as it once was. New discoveries continue. In recent years, archaeologists have found new tombs, uncovered lost cities, and revealed new insights into ancient life. Ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery help locate buried structures. DNA analysis of mummies reveals family relationships and disease. Computer modeling reconstructs ancient buildings and tests theories about construction methods. The Egyptian language survives in Coptic, used liturgically by Egypt's Christian minority. Though Coptic is no longer a spoken everyday language, it preserves ancient Egyptian in modified form. Scholars study Coptic to better understand ancient Egyptian grammar and vocabulary. Egyptian museums house incredible collections. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo contains treasures beyond counting, including Tutankhamun's gold and countless other artifacts. The new Grand Egyptian Museum, near the pyramids, will be one of the world's largest museums dedicated to a single civilization. It will provide better facilities for displaying and preserving Egypt's heritage. Egypt's influence on world culture is immeasurable. Western architecture has borrowed Egyptian motifs for millennia. Obelisks stand in cities worldwide, transported from Egypt or created as imitations. Art movements have drawn inspiration from Egyptian aesthetics. The fascination with Egyptian mythology and religion appears in countless books, films, and games. The concept of monumental architecture, buildings meant to last forever, owes much to Egypt. The idea that rulers should create lasting legacies through construction, that societies should invest resources in permanent structures. These ideas resonated with later civilizations who saw Egypt's enduring monuments. Egyptian contributions to mathematics, medicine, and astronomy, while later surpassed, were important steps in human knowledge. The Egyptian calendar influenced the Julian calendar, and through it our modern Gregorian calendar. Egyptian medical texts influenced Greek medicine, which influenced Islamic and European medicine. The chain of knowledge transmission passes through Egypt. Perhaps most importantly, Egypt shows what human civilization can achieve. In the ancient world, Egypt represented stability, prosperity, and cultural achievement. It demonstrated that organized societies could create wonders, preserve knowledge and endure for thousands of years. It showed that humans could build not just for survival, but for beauty, meaning, and eternity. Today, when we visit Egyptian monuments, read Egyptian texts, or view Egyptian art in museums, we connect with ancestors who lived thousands of years ago. We share their wonder at the night sky, their fear of death and hope for an afterlife, their joy in beauty and celebration, their pride in achievement. Across the vast gulf of time, we recognize ourselves in them. The ancient Egyptians wanted to be remembered. They built monuments, carved their names in stone, created art meant to last forever. They succeeded beyond anything they could have imagined. Not only are they remembered, but they are studied, admired, and visited by millions. Their civilization, though long vanished as a living culture, remains vibrantly present in human consciousness. When the last ancient Egyptian died, when the final hieroglyph was carved, when the temples finally closed and the old gods were abandoned, it must have seemed like an ending. In a sense it was. But the monuments remained. The knowledge, though temporarily lost, was recoverable. The achievements could still inspire. Egypt did not truly die. It transformed into heritage, into history, into a civilization that belongs not just to Egyptians, but to all humanity. Closing reflections. And so we come to the end of our journey through ancient Egypt. We have walked beside the Nile, stood before the pyramids, entered painted tombs, and glimpsed the lives of farmers and pharaohs, priests and craftsmen, queens and conquerors. Ancient Egypt was a civilization of extraordinary longevity and achievement. For 3,000 years, along the banks of one river, people built a culture that created monuments for eternity. They developed writing, mathematics, medicine, and art. They worshipped gods who explained their world. They prepared elaborate for death, believing firmly in continued existence beyond this life. They were not primitive ancients fumbling in the dark. They were intelligent, capable people who solved complex problems, organized massive projects, created beauty, and sought meaning in their existence. They laughed, loved, worried, hoped, and dreamed, much as we do. Their monuments remain, weathered but standing. The pyramids still dominate the desert skyline. Temples still shelter carved gods and painted prayers. Mummies still rest in museum cases, their preserved faces gazing across millennia. The Nile still flows, eternal and life-giving. What can ancient Egypt teach us? Perhaps that human achievement endures, that our works can outlast us if we build with care and purpose, that civilization is precious and requires effort to maintain. That beauty and meaning matter, not just survival, that our connection to the past enriches our understanding of ourselves. When we stand before a pyramid, or gaze at a tomb painting, or read an ancient poem, we touch eternity. We connect with people long vanished, who nevertheless remain present through what they created. Their voices speak across time through hieroglyphic inscriptions. Their hands shape the stones we see. Their minds conceived the monuments we admire. They believed in eternal life after death, in continuing existence if the proper preparations were made. In a way, they achieved it. Not in the magical afterlife they envisioned, perhaps, but in cultural immortality. They live on in memory, in monuments, in the heritage they left. Their names are still spoken, their achievements still celebrated. By their own measure, they succeeded. As you rest here, let the images of ancient Egypt drift through your mind. Picture the sun rising over the desert, gilding pyramid peaks with golden light. See the Nile flowing serenely between green fields. Imagine temple columns rising toward painted ceilings, creating forests of stone. Envision scribes bent over papyrus, carefully forming hieroglyphs. Think of farmers working flooded fields, of children playing in the shade, of priests chanting in candle-lit sanctuaries. Feel the continuity of human experience across time. Those ancient people felt hot sun on their skin as you do. They watched stars wheel overhead on clear nights. They knew love and loss, joy and sorrow, hope and fear. They looked at the same moon, walked on the same earth, wondered about the same mysteries of existence and death. Their civilization has ended, but its echoes remain. In museums and monuments, in books and documentaries, in our collective memory, ancient Egypt endures. The land that gave rise to one of humanity's greatest civilizations still exists. The river still flows. The desert still stretches to the horizon. And the monuments still stand, testaments to what humans can accomplish when we dream of eternity. Let these images comfort you as you drift towards sleep. The ancient Egyptians believed in order, in Maat, the cosmic balance that keeps chaos at bay. They worked to maintain that order through ritual, through justice, through right action. Perhaps there is wisdom in that, a recognition that we must each work to create and maintain what is good and true and beautiful. As the ancient Egyptians sought eternal life, they also celebrated mortal life. Their tomb paintings show banquets and gardens, music and dancing, all the pleasures of earthly existence that they hope to continue enjoying forever. They remind us to appreciate what we have, to find joy in simple things, to celebrate life even as we acknowledge its brevity. The stars above ancient Egypt were the same stars that shine tonight. The sun that warmed Egyptian fields is the sun that warms us. The moon that marked their months marks ours. We are connected to them through the unchanging cycles of nature, through the shared experience of being human, through the universal questions we all ask about life, death, and meaning. Now, as your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to drift, imagine yourself in ancient Egypt. Perhaps you are floating on the Nile in a small boat, watching the sunset paint the water gold and pink. Palm trees line the shore. Birds call in the reeds. The current carries you gently along, and there is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Or perhaps you are resting in a garden, cool and green, with a pool of water reflecting the sky. Flowers perfume the air. Somewhere, musicians play soft melodies on flutes and harps. All is peaceful. All is well. Let ancient Egypt's timeless quality soothe you. A civilization that lasted 3,000 years reminds us that some things endure, that patience and persistence matter, that we are part of something larger than ourselves. Our individual lives are brief, but we are connected to the whole human story, stretching from the distant past into the unknown future. The ancient Egyptians understood impermanence, even as they built for permanence. They knew that individuals die, but that civilization continues. They carved their names hoping to be remembered, and we remember them. They created beauty hoping it would last, and it has lasted. They searched for meaning in their lives, and that search itself gives their lives meaning still. As you settle into sleep, carry with you the gifts of ancient Egypt, the reminder that humans can create wonders, the comfort of rituals and rhythms that connect us to something beyond ourselves, the hope that we can leave something good behind, the knowledge that we are part of an ancient and continuing story. The pharaohs sleep in their museums and tombs. The priests have performed their last rituals. The scribes have written their final hieroglyphs. The civilization has passed into history, but the monuments remain. The knowledge survives. The inspiration continues. And now, you too can rest, peaceful and calm, letting thousands of years of Egyptian wisdom watch over you. The same moon that guided ancient travelers can guide you into gentle dreams. The same stars that the Egyptians mapped and mythologized shine down on you. The same mysteries of sleep and dreams that they contemplated await you. Sleep well, knowing that you are part of the human story that ancient Egypt helped write. Rest in the peace that comes from connecting with something timeless. Drift into dreams, perhaps, touched by the magic and mystery of the land of the pharaohs. Good night.